On today's show, the Suns are aggressively trying to reclaim their draft capital from the Rockets and how Houston can use that desperation to make a significant win now move. It's all coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Thursdays. Be sure to follow along wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. Just search Locked On Rockets, where the best way you can help us grow our shows to listen every day on a podcast platform of your choosing, and then like, comment, subscribe on YouTube. And as always, thanks so much for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day, whether it's on your way to work, on your lunch break, in the gym. Thank you so much for being an everydayer. We're going to be talking a lot about the Rockets and Phoenix Suns and a potential trade between these two teams on today's show, as there was some pretty significant reporting from the Athletic's Kelly Iko about the Suns' aggressive pursuit to try and reclaim their future draft capital from the Rockets, and how Houston can utilize kind of that desperation to make a significant win now move. There's a lot of stuff to get into. We're going to stay very Phoenix focused on today's show. There was some additional reporting in Kelly Iko's article as it pertains to some other potential offseason moves and directions the team may ultimately go. We'll talk about that in a follow-up episode. But we're going to start today's episode by visiting the reporting here as it's centered around the Suns and their pursuit, their aggressive pursuit of reclaiming their future draft capital. So this is what Kelly Iko had to write about it. And I'm going to put a link to the article in the episode description if you want to go check it out yourself. But it actually starts off talking about the kind of Devin Booker angle of things first. Let me just read through this stuff, and then we'll kind of, unpack it and diagnose the situation. The Rockets' young talent, draft capital, and team success make them a natural fit for a star player who may become available. As mentioned last month, long-term interest in Suns star guard Devin Booker has cooled, team and league sources said. Having been a desired target for a while, Houston's decision to pivot from Booker is the result of a few factors: his lowest scoring season since 2021, his worst shooting season since 2019, a hefty $100 million price tag, internal belief that Phoenix will extend Booker, lack of desire to gut a rising contender, and the continued growth of fourth-year guard Jalen Green. The latter, which has become a polarizing talking point on social media, is arguably the most important internally. Green's playoff struggles against Golden State are viewed as an opportunity for improvement in key areas, with the organization placing more onus on his production over an 82-game season than one series. But outside of Green, Houston's desire to keep its young core together is strong, team sources said. Internal calculus concerning any potential star and their projected trajectory would be compared to, say, the high ceilings of an Amen Thompson or Alperen Sengun, who both earned NBA honors this season. So that's kind of part one. And then the follow-up here, and this is what we're going to start with as far as trying to unpack this latest bit of reporting. This is not to say the Rockets and Suns are not in communication. On the contrary, Phoenix is aggressive in pursuit of A, trading Kevin Durant, and B, regaining full control of their draft capital, starting with the number 10 pick in next month's draft, team sources said. Since the conclusion of the season, Houston has fielded several calls from Phoenix, who have since gradually lowered their asking price for Durant, those sources said. There is a price where the Rockets would be interested, but with fear of breaking up their roster for a 36-year-old coming off injury, doubt remains over a deal materializing. Okay. So first, I want to just put the disclaimer in here that I fully understand that people are going to get very exhausted about hearing about the Rockets and Durant and Booker and the Suns and Giannis and all speculation until some moves are made surrounding these players. But that's just the reality of the NBA offseason. So that's kind of where we are. So I do apologize if you're getting fed up with these conversations, but this is what's going on with the Rockets. So this is what we're going to be talking about. So taking that for what it's worth, I've largely been a proponent of the Rockets potentially pursuing a Kevin Durant deal because it seems like it's almost a match made in heaven. We talked about it on our last episode. First off, there are a lot of connections that Kevin Durant has to this Rockets organization, be it former teammates, former coaches, interpersonal relationships. And he addresses kind of the biggest need for this Rockets team, which is a legitimate go-to scorer at the end of games, a legitimate bucket getter who can help you generate offense, especially in the half, which was the Rockets' biggest weakness this past season. And that was the main reason why they lost Golden State Warriors, was their inability to generate high level, consistent offense in the half court against Golden State's very, very good defense. So from that perspective, it makes a ton of sense, right? But then you start to factor in the other issues, right? The salary, the age component, the injury history. And I absolutely hear all of these concerns. And these concerns are legitimately valid when Rockets fans bring them up, be it on social media or in the YouTube comments of our show here. And I read them and I see them. But at the same time, this kind of position that the Phoenix Suns find themselves in, this level of desperation that they are showing in wanting to reacquire their future draft capital from Houston, this is exactly what you want, or exactly where you want a team to be in negotiations, because Phoenix is operating from a position with zero leverage, right? They're operating out of desperation at this point. And this is exactly where the Rockets want to be, where you can take advantage of a team that is going for an absolute Hail Mary, trying to recoup some semblance of value for a star who clearly doesn't want to be there, and a star that could provide a tremendous amount of value to what this team is trying to accomplish right here, right now. I've never wanted to gut this Rockets team and send multiple young pieces or multiple picks back. Durant, but if you can get Kevin Durant on a cheap deal, like if you can get KD for something that is essentially just like Dillon Brooks and salary filler, and then the number 10 pick in this year's draft, that is a really strong starting point for the framework of any potential deal that the Rockets could be involved in pursuit of adding Kevin Durant to a team that already won 52 games this past season without necessarily breaking up the future of the young core. And that's been the constant battle. And in so many of these discussions about what a trade would look like and how it could materialize, is how do you evaluate how much value you're sending back to the Phoenix Suns in a potential Kevin Durant deal, especially with the salary matching component being so difficult, with KD making roughly $54 million next season. It becomes really hard to try to match that salary without giving up too much value by way of the young players or future draft capital and that kind of thing. So coming up, we're going to get into the nitty gritty, what a deal could look like, some of the creative ways that the Rockets and Suns could finesse a deal. And then also that tidbit about Devin Booker. Is that true or is that posturing? And would the Rockets be better pursuing a Booker-oriented deal instead of a Kevin Durant deal? We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. Let's talk about something that doesn't get talked about nearly enough: men's mental health. There's the pressure to always keep things together, to perform, to provide, and never show weakness. But the truth is, real strength comes from opening up and taking care of your mental well-being. Every year, 6 million men in the U.S. experience depression, and many go undiagnosed. But talking to someone, a friend, a loved one, or a therapist can make a huge difference in your life. I've done therapy in the past, and I found it to be an incredibly cathartic experience to talk to an unbiased professional third party who can help, who's able to help me kind of walk through some of the day-to-day issues that I was facing in my life. As the largest online therapy provider in the world, BetterHelp can provide access to mental health professionals with a diverse variety of expertise. Talk it out with BetterHelp. Our listeners get 10% off their first month at BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right, so getting into the idea, the framework of a potential Kevin Durant deal here. And this is where the value component becomes really difficult, because it's really difficult for the Rockets to be able to match the incoming salary of Kevin Durant without giving up too much of their own value. And I think at least from a position of zero leverage, if you're the Phoenix Suns and you're operating from a position with zero leverage and acting out of desperation at this point to try and deal Kevin Durant and get back some semblance of value, there's no way that you're going to be able to get any of the future draft capital. You're not getting the 2027 pick. You're not getting the 2029 pick. The best you're going to get out of Houston is the number 10 pick in this year's draft. And I say that because the framework of a deal for KD as present, the only way that the Rockets and Suns could make a one-for-one, not a one-for-one, but just a one-on-one trade between Houston and Phoenix work is it would have to be Dillon Brooks, Jabari Smith Jr., Jock Landale, Aaron Holiday, and then the number 10 pick in this year's draft. And at that point, from a value perspective, essentially what you're giving up for KD, Holiday and Jock Landale they're just salary filler in the trade, but you're giving up Dillon Brooks, who is a starting caliber 3-and-D wing. Maybe he's regressed a little bit defensively, but still a very serviceable player. And definitely a guy who in a vacuum by himself is at least worth a first-round pick, potentially a couple firsts to the right team. You're giving up a young prospect in Jabari Smith Jr., who is, just finished year 3, is extension eligible this offseason. And so maybe there's some, potential financial hurdles somewhere down the line that you have to consider with that. But you'd be having to include Jabari because of his salary component, right? Because of how much he makes in order to meet the $54 million salary of KD. And then the number 10 pick in this year's draft, which seems like kind of the starting point for any of these negotiations for Phoenix being able to, potentially jumpstart their rebuild essentially, or their retooling efforts potentially around Devin Booker, although more on that in just a second. And so that kind of becomes the issue is that too much value to give up for Kevin Durant? Personally, I don't think it is. I understand the concerns that, I addressed a little bit there in segment 1, but at the same time, my thought process with any potential Kevin Durant deal for the Houston Rockets would simply be, you're not bringing in Kevin Durant to be the guy. You're not bringing him in to, feel the weight of being your number 1 option and leading scorer every single night on a night-to-night basis. Now, is he capable of that? Absolutely. Is he capable of getting you buckets at the end of a game when you need to try and win, when it's crunch time, whatever? Absolutely. But you're not putting KD in a LeBron-sized or Steph Curry-sized role offensively simply because you still have all the other major pieces that existed this past season that got the Rockets to 52 wins in the first place. Like, you're essentially losing out on 2 role players in Dillon Brooks and Jabari Smith Jr., whose offensive production would easily be replaced by adding Kevin Durant to the mix and then also factoring in increased roles and usage for guys like Amen Thompson, who projects to have a significantly bigger role offensively this upcoming season after we saw him grow exponentially on that side of the court this past season, assuming the same or similar levels of production from Jalen Green and Alperen Sengun, assuming, like Ime Udoka addressed in his exit press conference, bigger roles for both Reed Shepherd and Cam Whitmore off the Rockets bench. There is plenty of production to go around where on at least a night-to-night basis over the course of an 82-game season, you're not putting nearly as much pressure on Kevin Durant to deliver offensively. And, I made the argument on social media the other day that he'd be able to coast through the regular season. Maybe that was too strong of terminology to use, but essentially the team wouldn't be living and dying based on KD's production each and every night. Think about Jabari Smith Jr.'s offensive role on this Rockets team last season before his hand injury. When he was in the starting lineup, think about Jabari's role offensively, where he was essentially just a catch and shoot threat. And that was more or less it, right? Stayed in his lane, did what he does. Imagine Kevin Durant not being in a position where he has to score the ball. Now, obviously, you don't just roll Kevin Durant out there and not take advantage of having him on the floor. He would become a They would utilize him. They would, incorporate him into all their different schemes. But at the same time, it would also be just as easy for the Rockets to be able to continue to run, a steady amount of their offense through Jalen, Sengun, Amin, Fred handling the rock a little bit. And KD would be able to just sit on the perimeter and bang wide open threes at a 43% clip, mind you, which is what he shot from downtown last season. So you essentially just envision replacing Jabari Smith Jr. with a 43% knockdown three-point shooter, and then a version of that where you could go to him at the end of a shot clock after a broken play, or when you need a bucket, when you need a good offensive possession. Like, that's what the Rockets would be getting out of a potential KD deal in this dynamic. And you'd be looking at a starting lineup of Fred VanVleet, Jalen Green, Amin Thompson, Kevin Durant, and Alperen Sengun, which is still an incredible defensive lineup. KD's not quite the defender that he once was, but you still have your defensive ace in Amin Thompson. Jalen Green is a much improved defender. Kevin Durant is a solid enough defender. And Alperen Sengun has improved tremendously on that end to where the Rockets would still be able to maintain, their defensive identity. They might not be able to crack, top 4, top 3 defense with that lineup as their full-blown starting lineup, but they also still have plenty of other good defensive pieces coming off the bench with Tari Eason, with Steven Adams, re-signing him, assuming you re-sign him. And then you'd still have Reed Shepherd and Cam Whitmore, who you'd be expecting a lot more out of them. They'd suddenly be thrust into much bigger roles next season. But based on the internal belief that Reed Shepherd is ready for more, or that he has a very bright future, and we've seen the flashes from Cam Whitmore, that team is incredibly deep, and you'd still have, the ability of retaining, serviceable kind of end-of-bench guys like a Jayshawn Tate or a Jeff Green, potentially on vet minimum deals, that kind of stuff. Still have maybe Nate Williams floating down at the end of the bench. And you'd still have your MLE to be able to go sign a potential impact free agent to further bolster your depth in that lineup. If you wanted to go sign a replacement level, 3-and-D wing to make up for the fact that you're trading both Dillon Brooks and Jabari Smith Jr. to pick up a Kevin Durant type. So the Rockets would be left with plenty of options. And this deal, the biggest part of this deal, right, is they wouldn't be dipping into the future draft capital. They wouldn't be, foregoing or getting rid of that 2027 Suns pick or the 2029 Suns pick, which would be looking to be really, really juicy if the Suns are looking to completely tear things down and pivot from Kevin Durant. And that version of that team, the team that I just laid out, I think that team has at least, a floor of potentially the Western Conference Finals if all stays the same. It addresses the Rockets' biggest weakness. They still maintain a strong defensive identity, and assuming continued growth for all the young guys, right? Assuming, Sengun gets better and Amin gets better and Jalen gets better and Reed and Cam are ready to step into, bigger contributing roles next season. That team still has, a lot of internal growth, as well as adding a top 10 player right at this very moment to a team that already won 52 wins. And the cost doesn't seem that steep in order to accomplish it. So I like that version of that trade. And that very much feels like where things could potentially be headed with the desperation coming out of Phoenix. But I also think there's actually a different outcome here that might even be better for both teams involved and might actually put the Rockets in an even stronger position to compete, not just for a couple years as Kevin Durant ages out of his career, but for the foreseeable future. And I want to talk about that dynamic here in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by OpenPhone. If you're running a business, you know that every missed call is money left on the table. Think about the last time you had an urgent need, maybe for a plumber or a service provider. If the first person didn't answer, did you wait around? Probably not. I know I've been there. You call and I'm not waiting around. I'm calling the next line that I can find. You moved on, right? That's why you need OpenPhone. OpenPhone is the #1 business phone system built to streamline and scale your customer communications, all from an app on your phone or your computer. OpenPhone lets you manage business calls and texts from a single app, and their AI agent handles after-hours calls, answers common questions, and captures leads, so you never miss a chance to engage with a customer. OpenPhone is offering listeners 20% off your first 6 months at openphone.com/lockedonnba. That's openphone.com/lockedonnba, openphone.com/lockedonnba. And if you have existing numbers with another service, OpenPhone will port them over at no extra charge. OpenPhone, no missed calls, no missed customers. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right, so the KD stuff is one angle of this, and just to reiterate, I understand, right, that the idea of the value being given up for KD being Dillon Brooks, Jabari, and the number 10 pick might be too much for some people. I get that, especially given his age, his injury history, the fact that it would be maybe a 2-year window, maybe a 3-year window, if we're being generous, that the Rockets would have to be able to compete with him at the highest level. I get that. But it also, the uniqueness of that is it also preserves, right? It keeps Jalen Green on the roster. It gives the Rockets a chance to see if he is legit and if he can turn it around and if they can have another postseason appearance where he is able to thrive instead of struggle like he did against the Warriors. So there's that to consider. But I think there's an even more intriguing pathway here, and something that I think is very curious is that the Rockets, there have been multiple reports now. There was the initial report and now a follow-up in this report by Kelly Iko about the Rockets, supposed waning interest in pursuing a Devin Booker trade. Given the factors that were listed in the article, right? He had a down year, and what was it even specifically? Lowest scoring season since 2021, worst shooting season since 2019. $100 million price tag, internal belief that Phoenix will extend Booker, lack of desire to gut a rising contender. So here's the thing is, I think there's actually an outcome here where it makes more sense for both the Rockets and Suns for Phoenix to trade KD to literally any other team. Trade him to the Miami Heat, the Timberwolves, the Spurs are rumored to be interested in KD. Like whoever they want to send him to, send KD somewhere else. Get 1 or 2 picks back, 1 or 2 young players, whatever you can cobble together for a KD package. But the reality of the situation is, the Suns are so devoid of assets and they're so hamstrung by the Bradley Beal contract and his no trade clause that even if they wanted to retool around Devin Booker, it's going to be damn near impossible to put together a competent enough team around him at this stage of his career, given how limited the Suns are in the way of assets and whatnot. So Phoenix's best course of action moving forward would be to send KD wherever, get some assets, get some pieces, capital, whatever, and then negotiate with the Rockets and try and recoup their draft assets, recoup their draft future. And similar to what the Rockets did when they traded Brooklyn their picks back, ideally you would want to hold on to that 2029 Phoenix first-round pick, similar to how the Rockets held on to the 2027 Brooklyn first-round pick, because even though Brooklyn has the chance to bottom out and tank these next couple years, they're still not going to be a great team by 2027. So that 2027 first from Brooklyn has a lot of value still. Likewise, that 2029 first-round pick from Phoenix is going to have a lot of value. The wrinkle in this is that Washington owns the swap rights on Phoenix's 2026 first-round pick, so Phoenix has zero incentive to outright tank this upcoming season. That being said, I think you could maybe entice Washington with Cam Whitmore potentially as an upside piece, a lot of raw talent there. And if you could flip Cam Whitmore to Washington for the rights to, or the swap rights being relinquished on that Suns pick, and then to Phoenix, you would trade Jalen Green and salary filler, which makes the total outgoing package for the Rockets would be Jalen Green, Cam Whitmore, the number 10 pick in this year's draft, and the 2027 Phoenix pick. So 4 assets going out essentially from Houston for Devin Booker. That deal seems like a no-brainer to me. And it seems like it would be a no-brainer for Phoenix because then they'd get some young pieces back. They'd get Jalen Green, who still has some potential there, albeit he's not on his rookie scale deal anymore. So he's making $33 million a year, but still, flashy talent, can score the ball well and see what happens in the desert, right? If they make the deal for him, but put the rock in his hands and let him go to town, let him do his thing. And then, you get a window where you get 2 years to bottom out with no expectations. You get a chance at top prospects over the next couple drafts. And that, to me, seems like the best possible avenue rather than trying to cobble together some semblance of a competitive team around Devin Booker and maybe barely scraping to make it into the play-in, because you're not going to be able to put the right pieces around Devin Booker. You just don't have enough in the way of assets, right? The Suns are in a really bad spot. They have been so dreadfully mismanaged ever since making it to the finals that they had a championship caliber team. And then that championship caliber team, they gutted a little bit of it for KD. And I think the biggest mistake, though, that they made was flipping Chris Paul for Bradley Beal. That's where they really made a massive mistake. Because Beal is not anywhere near the same level of impact that Chris Paul is on the court, even though the numbers would tell you otherwise. You basically had 3 guys who all did the exact same thing as score the ball between Beal, Booker, and KD. Ain't nobody playing defense on that team. They were a bottom 4 defense this past season. And so all this stuff. But if you look at that package and you think about the idea of a Rockets roster that could then be Fred VanVleet re-signed on a fresh deal, Devin Booker, Dillon Brooks, Amin Thompson, Alperen Sengun, your potential starting 5, or maybe you move Dillon Brooks to the bench and you start Jabari Smith Jr. for spacing and size purposes, whatever. Like, point is, you got those 5 guys, and then off the bench, you still have Reed Shepherd, who projects to have a bigger role this upcoming season, the Aries, Tari and Jabari, and re-sign Steven Adams. And then you still also have the other guys that you can bring back, right? Jayshawn Tate, Jeff Green, you're into the bench kind of insurance policy guys, stay ready crew. And then you still have the MLE on top of that to flesh out the rest of the roster, to go add one more rotation piece to the mix. Essentially, you'd be running back this exact same roster that took the Warriors to 7 games and won 52 games, I should say. But you're replacing Jalen Green with Devin Booker. And I can already hear it now. There are some Rockets fans who are going to be like, well, why would you trade Jalen Green for Devin Booker and assets on top of that when Jalen Green's numbers are similar to Devin Booker, or Jalen Green has the chance to be even better than Devin Booker since he's only 23 years old? That's a fair argument. I think the counter argument is also that Jalen Green might not ever be as good as Devin Booker. That even though Jalen Green's numbers, the raw numbers, are close to Devin Booker's, the efficiency is still nowhere near what Devin Booker did. Even on a down year for Devin Booker, a down season for Devin Booker this past year, he averaged 25.6 points per game on 59% true shooting. That is absurd. So even though his efficiency, right, he only shot 33% from downtown, he was still incredibly effective from the mid-range. He still found ways to score the ball at a very, very high level. And he also facilitates at a high level, 7.1 assists per game, right? There's a lot that Booker would bring to the table that Jalen Green does not. He's an all-NBA caliber scorer. He's been the leading scorer on a legitimate championship caliber team before, and he's only 28 years old. He's smack dab in the middle of his prime right now. And I think, again, I can see both arguments. I can see the argument for wanting to stay the course, bank on continuity, give Jalen Green another chance to prove himself next season, to come back in the playoffs next year and prove that, his first go around against the Warriors was just that it was just his first playoff appearance, and that he's going to grow from it, learn from it, all that. But the alternative is, trading for an established product, a guy who's been there, done that, who's made it to the finals, and, without damaging anything else. Like the point in the article was gutting a contender. if all it takes is Jalen Green, Cam Whitmore, and filler, that's not gutting a contender. That's keeping all the other pieces in place. And because it sounds like Phoenix is operating from such a position of desperation, I think there's a very legitimate possibility to be able to achieve that. Previously, maybe not. Maybe Phoenix would have demanded, oh, we want Reed Shepherd, or we want one of Jabari or Tari in the trade as well. But Phoenix is kind of screwed. And because Houston owns their draft capital, it's not like they can go somewhere else. It's not like they can trade to another team and then be bad, because then Rockets just get a bunch of really good picks. So they have to play ball with Houston. And the other side of this is, again, there's the optimistic side. There's the side of Rockets fans that want to see Jalen Green back again next season, want to give him another shot in the playoffs. But here's the rub is, worst case scenario, right, would be you run it back next season. Rockets still have regular season success, right? They're still a, top 4 team in the West, 50 plus wins. Cool. It all looks good. But then they make it to the playoffs again. And if Jalen Green lays another egg in the playoffs and the Rockets get bounced in the first round or second round and he struggles again, then he's basically permanent. He's damaged goods at that point, because then it won't be just a one-off. Oh, it was his first playoffs and there's still hope about him growing and improving and bouncing back. It's no, okay, he doesn't have it in the playoffs. And at that point, you're stuck. At that point, nobody's going to want to trade for him. There's not going to be this idea of like, oh, maybe he breaks out in year 6, or, maybe he just needs a change of scenery. It's like, this might be the opportunity for the Rockets to cash in, right? This might be the chance for the Rockets to take a big swing, to improve the roster, to get a proven star talent, a proven all-NBA caliber talent, and elevate themselves from, wannabe contenders, from up and coming young team into legitimate contention territory with the addition of a Devin Booker type. I think it makes all the sense in the world. And I really do hope that, and that's why I find it intriguing that there have been multiple kind of passing reports about the Rockets supposedly not being interested in Devin Booker. So maybe it is just posturing from Houston's front office to try and drive down the price even further. But if Phoenix's front office has been doing all kinds of wacky stuff. So maybe they do just double down on Devin Booker and they extend him and they try to cobble together some kind of a competitive team with him and Bradley Beal and whatever you get for the, from a KD trade that's not to the Houston Rockets, or maybe it is to the Houston Rockets. Who knows? But that seems like a poor usage of assets, and that would lead the Suns down a path where they're going to be in a much worse spot in 2 to 3 to 4 years than they would be if they just ripped the Band-Aid off right now and dealt Booker to Houston, got their assets back, and were able to kind of proceed forward with a brief rebuild or a, bottoming out process, and just kind of see where things are in a couple years. So those are my arguments for it. I think it makes a ton of sense. And the more that I sit here and think about it, the more that I weigh the different options, Giannis, KD, Booker, Jaylen Brown, the more that I think about it, I think Booker is number 1 on my list. I really do. 1B after Giannis, depending on price, because it's hard to not want a top 3 player in his prime. Just puts the Rockets on the clock a little bit harder than the Booker situation does. But very curious your thoughts. Would you want to see the Rockets go after KD with the package mentioned? Would you want to see them go after Devin Booker with the package mentioned? Give me your thoughts in the YouTube comments. Remember, the best way to help us grow the show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform of your choosing, and then like, comment, subscribe on YouTube. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.